Greetings, Marsh here, and welcome to episode 16 of my Pyanodons playthrough. In this episode, we are going to do a ton of research to get ready for the next science pack, as well as produce sodium hydroxide to make our circuits build a little more efficient. Enjoy. Well, one thing we can do is plastics, which are made from aromatics and our syngas that we're holding on to, and that's done in a biofactory. Adds, processes, and extracts materials to and from natural sources. And then that lets us make the empty fuel canister, and then any liquid type burnable fuel, we can put them in a canister. And all of the canisters have the same value of 10 megajoules, but the amount of fuel you have to put in the canisters differs. So with condensates, as bad as it is, requires 50 units to get the fuel. But kerosene, we would only need 7. And we're getting very close to a huge amount of research necessary for the next science pack. But the last thing we have access to in this tier is stage 1 of cellulose. And this is the kind of thing where it might seem like a side grade as opposed to an upgrade. We'll have to math it out. But if we electrolyze saline water and get sodium hydroxide, and then add that to wood, we can make cellulose as opposed to the old recipe, which required limestone. I'm guessing the main advantage is it saves a ton of power because the biofactory is a relatively cost-efficient building with electricity, whereas the high-pressure furnaces are not. So making the cellulose anywhere but there is a potentially better idea. We can math it out, and everything else from here is going towards our first science pack, and there's a lot to talk about, so let's do that when we're ready. Where there's the biofactory, it's a pretty cool looking building. And the electrolyzer, very futuristic and rather small building. So let's math out if this recipe is any good. We needed to have 0.23 batteries a second, and it consumes 28 megawatts. That if we do the new recipe, it actually goes down to 19. So that's a pretty decent energy savings. And also if you look at the logs, it goes from 0.81 to 0.58. In addition, it creates some chlorine and hydrogen for free for later uses, but probably the big change is that the amount of saline water required goes from 57 to 143. And I guess for it to be completely balanced, we also need to include the saline calculation. It's not much, but that's actually a huge amount of tar. So it is a strange recipe. Well, okay then, there's no putting this off. It's time to work on Pi Science 1, and there's a lot that goes into it. The main big thing is that we need to grow our first actual creature. So not just plants anymore, but creatures too. And the plants have their own specific life cycles, but the animals really do. And I guess I'll pronounce that as rock. That's kind of what it seems like to me. And there's a lot of research that you do that it all seems like it's essentially the same thing, but they're just separate researches. It is what it is. So we're just going to research all of them, and don't worry about it too much. We'll figure it out later. We have basic substrate here. That unlocks the microorganism mine. Mine, collect and incubate microorganisms from a specific soil patch to incubated petri dishes. And it's kind of another building that mines something from nothing. It's basically like taking the petri dishes and exposing them to the ground, and then it causes them to be incubated. You thought the cellulose had a fast decay time. These dishes? It's 45 seconds, so it's really fast. However, note that the decay result is simply the petri dish again. So you don't actually lose any materials here. You just need to have it go from being incubated to processed as quickly as possible. And they go into basic substrate, which is cellulose, the incubated petri dish, and moss. And of course, the cellulose is a short life cycle item too. And the substrate is not. So as long as we get it into substrate form, it will then be stable. It gives us a new recipe for molten glass. We'll have to calculate that. I kind of recall that it's not really good, that it saves you quartz, but it actually consumes more fuel to do it. But we'll have to calculate it out. And then we have biotechnology, which unlocks the incubator, a building dedicated to growing and maintaining microbiological cultures or mature multicellular organisms. That was a bit of a mouthful. And we can make a biocontainer, which will use that titanium. Now we're going to start using a bunch of flora, where we put the flora in and make biosamples. And then there's xenobiology, a form of biology that is not yet familiar to earth science. Unlocks the data array, Download DNA codes from Earth's databank way faster than Wi-Fi. It's sci-fi. You're basically downloading data of creatures. And the data that you start with is generic Earth DNA samples. And then we have genetics here. That unlocks the Gene Lab, which does actually use those smaller Pi tanks. So some of the tanks do go into other buildings if you end up building too many. A genetic laboratory specializing in manipulation of Earth and alien genomes. And currently this can take petri dishes and mosses and make a gene sample. Then it keeps going. We have biotechnology machines, which unlocks the creature chamber, a building dedicated to growing adult GMO and native organisms in artificial enclosures. The way I think of this machine is it's the 3D printer of creatures, and that is essentially what it does. It creates creatures from raw resources. It doesn't hatch creatures from eggs, it prints them from materials. And then you have the much more natural way of doing it, a reproductive complex equipped with 3 breeding pods with several adaptive biomes for animal-like creatures bonking themselves. It is a huge building. You can see by cost, it is incredible. That is the natural place for creatures to reproduce. This is the artificial place. So we do that, and now we're at land animals. Unlock the ability to produce land GMOs based on native alien species and genetic engineering, and this unlocks the cage. That's kind of why I feel like some of these researches are unnecessary complex, I guess I would say. Like, it seems like they could have combined a few of these since you essentially have to do all of them, and it's not really clear what they're all unlocking, but I don't know, maybe it was there to intimidate you. But they're all essentially the same process here. But yes, we can make cages now. And they're actually surprisingly hard to make. That you can handcraft them, but it takes forever. So you definitely want to automate it. And finally, after all of that, we're at rocks. It's not entirely clear when they talk about native creatures or not. Like, are they talking about native to Earth or native to Nauvis? I'm going to see this as native to Nauvis. That simply the rocks were not nearby, and instead we have to 3D print them. That unlocks the rock paddock, and each creature has their own living space, and that's just theirs. And of course, a caging recipe. This process does not hurt them in the slightest. There's no pain, they feel nothing. That's why we have to put them in cages first. And then the rock codex, which is similar to how we did moondrops, that simply to print them from nothing, we need a codex with the instructions for the machine. And we have 2 methods of making them. The artificial way is with these ingredients here, and they're printed up in a chamber, and this is very inefficient. So you would only want to do this to get your initial crop. I was thinking there might be a better word for that, but not really. Not really. Our initial crop of creatures, and then after you have a few, you can start growing them the natural way. Of course, there's a recipe here to remove them from the cages, and the life cycle of rocks is first, they start in a reproductive complex, and you add water, flora, sap, and moss, and you will get some cocoons. The adult creatures are a part of this, but they're modules. They're not ingredients. It is interesting, you have to put the water barrels in and then remove the barrels later, just as an added complication. I guess they're so peaceful that we have to put the water in barrels. It can't just be a tap. You then go from the reproductive complex to the rock paddock, and then give them flora, cocoons, and moss, and more water barrels, and then you will get some rocks. And note that although 10 cocoons went in, you only get 2 adults on the way out. So it's particularly inefficient when it comes to the cocoons. So I imagine, as peaceful as they may be, that a lot of them die in their juvenile phase. And that is not all of the research. That is simply the research to get to rocks. And to have any idea why we're doing this, we kind of need to keep researching. And with one research complete, we can put in one more. And now we have rendering. Of course, that unlocks the slaughterhouse. Alien killing and rendering building. Don't worry, they don't feel a thing. See, I told you. Even the game tells you. They wouldn't lie. And this unlocks the ability to render them apart. And of course, they have to be caged because they absolutely don't fight back at all. And each creature breaks apart into different types and amounts of resources. The rocks will separate into meat, chitin, guts, brains, and their blood, I guess, is formic acid. And that is ultimately what we're doing all this for, is for the formic acid. And of course, all of these things decay. So there's going to be logic related to that. Like, they can decay into jerky, which is basically a way you can heal yourself if you want to. And also there's a recipe for carbolic oil, but this is probably another one of those Pi hard mode recipes, because if you could just turn the chitin into the carbolic oil and naphthalene, it would be fine, but you also have to throw in middle oil too, so I don't know if that's worth it. So while we're here, we can look at the recipe to fully render the rocks that the meat decays in 4 hours and gives you a beef jerky. The chitin doesn't decay at all. The guts decays in 8 hours and gives you a jerky, and the brain decays in 16 hours and gives you a jerky. And that jerky we'll be able to do stuff with later, but for now it's just the natural life cycle of alien guts. One more research done means one more thing to put on the list. We are chopping up the rocks in order to make latex, and the recipe here starts at creamy latex, which is limestone, sap, and water. Then there's sodium alginate, stone, limestone, seaweed, and water. Add the two of those, plus the formic acid, which is the blood of the rocks, will allow us to make a latex slab, and then that latex slab can be treated with steam to make actual latex. Awesome, one more slot open. Ultimately, we are doing all of that for Pi Science Pack 1, and that is clearly our gating technology into many wonderful things, such as electric mining drills. So we definitely want to get this done. It unlocks the Research Center, dedicated science building to develop and produce science packs and special advanced ingredients. With that latex and coal, and that's regular coal, we can make rubber stoppers, and then the rubber stoppers get combined with molten glass to make glassware, and then that glassware has a bunch of basic substrate added in, and if you remember from back here, that was cellulose, petri dishes, and moss. And I think it's funny that you essentially had to manufacture the entire science pack, where you had to make the beaker, you had to make the rubber, then you had to make the stuff that goes inside the science pack. But that'll be it. That's the science pack that we need. So we're almost done. There's one more research that we can add in here, so we might as well. And I guess it's time to start making all these buildings and adding them to the shrine. Well, one thing we did want to calculate is whether or not molten glass from sand was better than just doing it raw. And here's the calculation, that in order to make one glass by adding sand, we would need 280 condensates and 4 quartz. And the way we're doing it now, it's the same amount of fuel, but 50% more ore. So whether that's worth it to you is up to you. Really, it's only going to save a little bit of mining, and even including that into the calculation, and this is actually pretty funny, but it balances out to exactly the same energy cost. So yes, you get more for your input ore, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. And whoops, looks like I had that in the wrong order. So actually, when you include the soil machines in there, it actually like doubles the electricity cost. And that's a lot of extra complication that doesn't seem necessary, especially considering this patch is 21 million big, and we're not even through 1% of it yet. So I don't think it's really that important, especially considering that very soon into our Pi Science 1, we'll get access to quartz processing, which will allow us to actually process it like other ores through a jaw crusher. And that will not only improve the yield, but also reduce the fuel requirement. So this is one of those weird recipes where not sure why it's there. And I guess if you want to do it, you can do it, but it seems like it's safe to skip. All right, then we have one more slot for the last thing that we can research here, and that's zoology. So this will give us some extra logistics, that it unlocks the caravan, which is a GMO creature, so we have to print them in the creature chamber. And there's 2 versions, the fluid one and the not fluid one. The fluid one, you have to give it a tank and some pumps, which is hilarious. And also there are outposts as well, and this gives you some logistics slots on your character, but basically it lets you have, well, the item is called a caravan, running around your factory delivering things to their outposts. So usually when you get to this point, you have a ton of spaghetti, and this is a way of reducing it. I probably shouldn't talk about them too much, because we'll definitely want to cover caravans when we get to them, because there's a lot that goes into it. But just keep in mind that will be a benefit for when we have completed all of this research and have it all up and running. So there's the data array. It's a huge building. And to make the gene lab, we actually need to have plastic. It's funny that we don't need plastic for anything, but we do need it for the gene lab, so that's one more task we need to take care of first. It's a pretty neat square building. And the microorganism mine. And we need plastic for the creature chamber as well. So here's the reproductive complex, and it is absolutely ginormous. So big it doesn't even fit in the shrine, or really anywhere around here. It's so big. We have a new expanded shrine location out here, and it's so big that the lights don't even really do it justice. That's why you want these bright lights. But man, look at that. It's almost hard to even compare it to vanilla just because it's so big and there's nothing to compare it to. But we have some steam engines, so that gives you an idea of how big this thing is. It's one building. You know, on second thought, I feel like we really should upgrade the cellulose just to save the electricity, because it's only going to get worse with the next science pack. I was worried it would be a lot of work, but really we just need to copy this again and put it somewhere. I mean, there's lots of space here, so. And this really hasn't been running. That we have a pretty good amount of coal gas otherwise, although the number is going down currently. But I think we're going to be producing enough where we don't really need to worry about it. And doubling something is pretty easy because you just make the numbers twice as big as they were before. So we just need to copy and make another one. And we can fix it after we've placed it. And we do want it to be reasonably close. This would be a nice place to put it. Our mine is here, but we could just move the belt out of the way. That said, more belts might be coming through here later, and it might get a little crowded. We could do here. Kind of the same thing applies, but it's closer to the coal mine. Sure. This power plant is relatively temporary, so let's plop it in there. Okay, then we need to pipe 2 more belts of coal in, and that is kind of the problematic part, is we only have so many belts of coal. I think we just have to take it away from this power plant and find a different place to bring coal in, or just move the power plant. So this should work because it has before, but let's make sure it still does. Okay, all the pipes are connected. Looks like most of the junk got pulled off the belt. And let's combine the coke and the iron oxide, because we actually have splitters now and we can just do it properly when we get there. Basically something like this. And we're already loaded up on tar, so it's not really going to run. We are just preparing here. Well, another thing that needs to be twice as big now is the syngas. Well, we got 14 here, and luckily there's more room. I don't like that walking will be difficult between here, so we need to fix that. And that's slightly too many of them, but good enough. The science isn't running. No planter boxes, because no stones. Are we really out of stone? Huh. I guess so. Well, I guess we're at the point where we need to consolidate all of our stone onto one belt and then deliver it. But I don't really want to right now. Let's fix one problem at a time here. So that's the tar delivery part. Now we need to adjust the circuits build here, because we need to figure out how much saline water we need. And that's 137. That's slightly more than what that building can do, so let's just plan around making 2 of them. Well, that's easy enough, we have 2 of those, but now we need to substantially build this up. Meanwhile, our shale oil is slowly and consistently processing everything it has. And actually, the tank's almost gone, so that's good. You might want to save that last one, because right now that condensate's pull is pretty high. And we're actually going to need 2 inserters as output for the sulfur now. And I put the machine on the bottom because it just looks a little better. They don't look like they have recipes set, but they do. It's just a dark icon. And we might as well upgrade these inserters while we're here. Now we only need to have 12 of them. And this is actually going to be quite a lot, so let's switch the sides. Yeah, when this is going, it's going to be substantial. At some point, we might need to just start burning coal dust where it's produced, because our factory's making enough of it now where it's actually kind of a problem. Meanwhile, all the research is done. But before we get attached to that, we should upgrade our cellulose here. And we do have a choice about where to put the electrolyzers. You might want to put them right next to where they're needed, and that's fine. But the problem is we're going to create 2 byproducts, chlorine and hydrogen, and right now they're just going to be vented, and that's easy. But later on we're going to need sodium hydroxide in larger quantities for other things, and also the chlorine and hydrogen. So that would be 1 pipe going in and 2 pipes of byproducts going out, which is pretty bad. compared to making the sodium hydroxide at a central location, specifically one that deals with chlorine and hydrogen, and then the sodium hydroxide could just be sent in. So it would only be 1 belt in and 0 belts out as byproduct. So doing that would be a lot better. And we technically need 2 of these. And do we want to build up and put more in there? Maybe. But let's grab our electrolyzer from the shrine of machines we haven't used yet. We need to fill it in with these other things we've researched. So much junk we have to go through. Well, we can build a caravan outpost. It means nothing without the caravans. But there you go. We will handle how that building works once we actually have the caravans. So here's what the research center looks like, and the rock paddock. And even then, we still got, I think, 2 more machines we need to make with plastic. So, this doesn't fit here either. Alright, it goes over here next to the reproductive complex. There we go. So how about let's do 4 electrolyzers. It's going to have a very long belt to fill up as a buffer. How about let's just place it down here since there's room, and I doubt this is going to expand anymore because that's 1 full belt. Luckily the buildings are fairly small. Would we want to have a saline tank? Maybe. Let's use this big tall one. We'll just connect it in there. And now we are filled up on tailings very quickly. But all these are running. Seems good. Alright, in goes the saline water, and let's casually consume 40 megawatts on this. The hydrogen and chlorine get vented away, and we keep the sodium hydroxide. Definitely we would only want this to be on one side of the belt to minimize the buffer. Yeah, that shows you that right when that starts going, boom, electrolyzers at the top. And in fact, look at our electrical network, it's actually stressing it. But believe it or not, this will actually save energy. Okay, sodium hydroxide is ready. There is one other thing here. As long as we're not bursting it, it'll be fine, but we do need to double up on this part here, handling the sulfur. And okay, cool. All of those are going, making lots and lots of ash. It's actually an ash generator, and we're keeping up with demand, and that's what we wanted to see. Luckily, there's room here. No long-handed inserters though, but wonderful, wonderful splitters. Eventually I'll get over it, but it's hard to, because we've been going without them for so long. Alright, when the sulfur gets here, we'll be able to process it, and I was wondering where it was, and it's getting here. It's just taken a second. It's a long belt, and it's a big factory already. It is actually kind of nuts that we've barely done anything, and the factory's this big already. But that's what happens. Cool, one of our tailings ponds is empty now, but here we are. Now we need to get the sodium hydroxide from here to there. It's a long belt, but it's 1 belt compared to multiple pipes. And I guess we'll just run it next to saline water. Well, this build is a lot smaller. It only requires 3 biofactories. And in fact, we can do a direct insertion here to potentially further minimize the amount of spoilage on the cellulose. So we'll take a biofactory. On one hand, this will make the build more efficient, but on the other, I'm thinking we might have to rebuild it, which is what I was trying to avoid. Aluminum is disappearing slowly. Yeah, because this is not set up for it in any way. Yay! We get to rebuild it. Actually, a lot of this doesn't even need to be here anymore, because it was very limited on throughput. So this really is a better recipe. It's a lot simpler. So let's just set it up the exact same way as the other one, because it seemed to work. So cellulose gets inserted if it's less than 10, which is the current crafting recipe plus the next one. And then whether or not the main building runs depends on how many batteries are available. So that should be it. Let's put it in here and see if it works. Certainly makes this whole thing a lot more compact. And this kind of was one of the biggest parts of the setup, so I can see how this could immediately help if you perhaps underbuilt. I hate pulling out a bunch of circuit network stuff. You just never know if it's going to work properly when you replace it. And pretty much none of this either. There's so much hooked up in here. Makes me worried. Well, even though the stuff is all lined up over here, let's just put it in this space because it's open. So is this going to work? I don't know. Well, we can at least check on the circuit conditions that these machines are turned off because we don't need any batteries. I imagine we're still using a ton of power on the electrolyzers. Oh yes. It's weird how they're pulsing. Yeah, saline water is out. Why isn't this one running? Oh, we didn't get rid of the soot. Well, that explains it. So if we put all this in, the machines should not run, and they aren't. Let's just pull these batteries out for now, and that should turn everything on. It's actually a pretty fast machine, really. Let's see what happens when we fill up. There we go. These turn off, and a little bit of cellulose is stuck in there. That's about the best we can hope for, really. To have zero waste, we're going to need to have some kind of circuit condition to produce these in groups of 5, and since the machine makes them in 2s, it would basically have to produce them in 10 instead. And there's probably some way of doing that with belts and things, but I think this is good. It looks a lot more clean and elegant compared to the previous build, and it is certainly way more energy efficient. It's actually going to need a yellow inserter to fully max that out. And there we go. Lots and lots of saline water, lots of electrolysis, but actually, it caught up, surprisingly. Those machines were faster than I was expecting them to be. Yeah, when they're going, they are the biggest consumer by far. Surprisingly though, all those evaporators are quite substantial too. I was not expecting that. They're small buildings, so they're unassuming, but they're actually a megawatt each. We've got 26 megawatts of evaporators right there. You could just dump the tailings water, but that is a lot of free stuff you get by processing it. Things are constantly ramping up in the factory, just a lot of movement. But I like this because instead of a bunch of empty belts, they're belts with actual things on them and you can see what they're supposed to do, which is a lot better than the empty belt spaghetti of before. Okay, I believe the other problem the factory had was a lack of stone. And we have stone, it's just not being consolidated into one place. And to be honest, I'm not even sure where to start, because the stone that's coming from the stone mine is a different priority stone from the byproducts of copper, because we always want to process the copper stone, and then the mine stone, which is the stuff on the left here, will only run if it needs to. There's a lot of stuff we have to do here. It's gonna be belt spaghetti of the splitter age. That stone comes in and it goes down and everything combines here. It gets sent to where it needs to, but we also need to deliver stone, which is what this part of the belt is for. And then this goes all the way back down. And then when the stone gets here, it just goes in to get consumed. So if that was done correctly, we should have consolidated the stone into one location and then given priority to all of the consumers. And yeah, it's starting up. It'll take a second to equalize, and then we'll have to check up on it. And cool, the saline caught up. Everything looks great here. Electrolyzers are calm. The factory's energy consumption is reasonably low now. And that's the end of this episode. On the next one, we are going to start working on our factory's first creature, the Vrock. Thanks for watching. I'll see you later.